It was supposed to be the easiest day of my life. My wife's water broke early in the morning, no warning, no time to prepare. I rushed to call an ambulance. We were about to become parents. All I could think about was getting her to the hospital and getting there fast. But then came Karen. We live in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind where everyone has their noses buried in other people's business. And Karen, well, she was the kind of neighbor who had far too much time on her hands, too much interest in everyone else's affairs. The woman had a complaint about everything, from the shade of your front door to whether or not your trash cans were properly tucked away behind the fence. She'd been a thorn in my side for months, but today, she took it too far. I'll admit, I was in a bit of a panic, running back and forth between the front door and the street, waiting for the ambulance to arrive. My wife was in the car, her breathing sharp and quick, her hand clutching mine like it was the only thing holding her to this world. I was trying to keep calm, trying to be strong, but there was only so much I could do when I had no control over what was happening. And then, the ambulance arrived. I breathed a sigh of relief. But that relief was short-lived. Karen. She was standing at the end of her driveway, eyes narrowed, arms folded tightly across her chest. She was watching everything with that look she always wore, like she had something to prove. The paramedics were preparing to load my wife in, and I was already mentally preparing for the mad dash to the hospital. That's when Karen decided it was time to intervene. "Excuse me," she shouted, striding over to the ambulance with a purpose that could only mean trouble. The paramedics glanced up, confused. "You're blocking my driveway." I looked at her, barely processing her words. "What? Your ambulance is parked too close to my property," she insisted, waving her hand at the tire like it was a crime scene. "It's violating the HOA rules. You can't park like that. The guidelines are clear." The paramedic, who clearly had seen her before, sighed. "Ma'am, this is an emergency. We need to get her to the hospital." "Not my problem," Karen shot back, her voice rising. "My driveway, my rules. I've already filed 3 complaints about the way this neighborhood's been run. If you don't move that ambulance, I'll be calling the HOA. This is illegal." I could feel my blood pressure spike, and I glanced at my wife, who was visibly uncomfortable. She was in pain, in labor, and here I was, stuck dealing with Karen's obsession with rules that no one cared about. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I snapped, stepping forward, trying to keep my voice calm but failing. "My wife's about to have our baby. She's in labor. We don't have time for this." Karen didn't back down. Instead, she smirked like she was savoring this moment. "Rules are rules," she said, as if she were reciting a mantra, like some twisted authority figure sent by the HOA gods to ruin lives. One of the paramedics, an older man with a patience level that rivaled a saint's, raised his hands in surrender. "Look, we don't have time for this. We'll move the ambulance once she's inside." But Karen wasn't hearing it. She stormed forward, muttering about disrespectful neighbors and breaking the law. She knelt down beside the ambulance, pulling something out of her purse. I wasn't sure what it was until I saw the glint of a knife in her hand. She slashed the tire. The sickening hiss of air being released from the tire was the last sound I expected to hear in that moment. Time seemed to slow down. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Did you really just slash the tire of the ambulance?" I could barely get the words out. The audacity. The sheer level of entitlement. "Oh, relax," Karen said, standing up with a smug grin. "It's just a tire. It'll be fine." The paramedic was frozen, staring at the deflated tire, as I stood there, dumbfounded. "What do you mean it'll be fine? We need that tire! You've just delayed an emergency." Karen looked me dead in the eye, unbothered. "You're the one causing all the trouble. This is all your fault." I snapped. "You've got to be kidding me." Before I could say anything else, the paramedic turned to me. "We'll need to call for another ambulance. We're going to be delayed." I stood there, staring at the flat tire and then back at Karen, who was now retreating to her front porch as if she had just won some small victory. My wife was in labor, and this woman had just single-handedly made it 1,000 times worse. Are you serious? I muttered under my breath. I ran back to the car to check on my wife, my mind racing. What had just happened? How could anyone be this callous, this reckless, this ridiculous? But then again, it was Karen. And this was far from over. I didn't even have time to process what had just happened before the chaos began. The ambulance, now stuck with a flat tire, wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. My wife was in pain, and the clock was ticking. The paramedics called for another vehicle, but they told me it would take at least 20 minutes. It felt like an eternity. As if this wasn't enough, Karen was still standing on her porch, watching, waiting for her moment to gloat. I couldn't believe she had done it, slashed the tire, all because of some HOA rule about property lines that she had pulled out of her hat. And now, I was stuck, caught between my wife's labor pains and Karen's insufferable need to control every inch of the neighborhood. Are you seriously just going to stand there? I shouted at Karen, my voice dripping with frustration. You've delayed an emergency. This isn't about your petty rules, it's about saving a life. Karen didn't budge. I'm just making sure people follow the rules. You can't park an ambulance wherever you want. You're the one causing a scene. Her response made my blood boil. You've got to be kidding me. You just slashed the tire of an ambulance, Karen. People like you are the reason no one in this neighborhood can breathe without worrying about your next complaint. She crossed her arms and gave me a look that could only be described as smug. Well, maybe if people respected the HOA guidelines, we wouldn't have these issues. This is all your fault. I could feel my fists clenching. If only I could go over there and throttle her. But I had bigger problems, like my wife, who was struggling with the pain in the back seat of the car, her breathing uneven. The paramedics had already started trying to patch things up, but it was clear this delay wasn't helping. We needed to get her to the hospital, not argue with Karen about property lines. I looked at the paramedic who had been standing by the flat tire, clearly at a loss for what to do. How long until the replacement ambulance arrives? 20 minutes, he said, glancing up at me with a grim expression. We can't do anything until then. We'll make sure she's stable, but we need to get her to the hospital as soon as possible. I turned back to Karen, who was still standing there, now watching the paramedics with an air of satisfaction. You happy now, Karen? You've ruined my wife's chances of having a safe delivery. She tilted her head slightly. I'm just protecting the neighborhood from people like you. And honestly, I don't think your wife needs to be in that ambulance anyway. She should have had a home birth. You're wasting resources. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Home birth? Are you serious? My wife is in labor, in pain, and you think she should have just given birth at home? I nearly laughed in disbelief. You're not even a doctor, Karen. She waved her hand dismissively. I'm just saying that people like you should be more responsible with your actions. This isn't the first time the ambulance has blocked a driveway, and it won't be the last unless we start enforcing the rules around here. I was about to snap, but the paramedic interrupted. Sir, I think we need to focus on getting your wife to the hospital. Karen, I suggest you step aside so we can at least assess the situation. Karen stared at him for a long moment before smirking and stepping back, muttering under her breath about how rules were rules. I couldn't take it anymore. I stepped forward, almost crossing into her yard. You know what? I'm done with this. I'm calling the HOA myself. I'll make sure they know exactly what you've done today. You've crossed the line, Karen. She took a step toward me, her eyes narrowing. Go ahead. They'll back me up. The rules are on my side. I could barely believe how delusional she was. There was no way anyone could back her up after what she had done. But I couldn't waste any more time arguing with her. My wife needed me, and all I could think about was getting her to the hospital. You'll get what's coming to you, Karen. I promise. I walked away, only to hear Karen call after me. You'll see. You can't escape the HOA rules. They'll catch up to you. I ignored her, walking to the car where my wife was still struggling. The paramedics were working quickly, but they had no choice but to wait for the replacement ambulance. The minutes dragged on, each one feeling like it was stretching into hours. My wife's pain was becoming more pronounced, and I felt completely helpless. Every second that ticked by was another second that could cost her. I pulled out my phone and called the ambulance company again, hoping for some sort of update. No luck. They assured me the second vehicle was on its way, but they couldn't guarantee how much longer it would take. Frustration was bubbling up again, and all I could do was try to stay calm and keep my wife's spirits up. Then, to make matters worse, Karen did exactly what I had feared. She called the police. "Excuse me," a voice from behind me said. I turned to see a uniformed officer approaching, his expression flat. "We've received a complaint. There's been a disturbance here." I felt the anger rise up in my chest again. "A disturbance? A woman slashed my wife's ambulance tire, officer. That's a disturbance. And now she's threatening to press charges against me for some bullshit HOA rule violation." The officer raised an eyebrow. "You're telling me she slashed your tire?" "Yes. Right in front of me. She slashed it and then had the audacity to act like she did nothing wrong." The officer turned to Karen, who was standing a little ways behind me, watching the situation unfold with a smug look on her face. "Is that true, ma'am?" Karen gave her usual nonchalant shrug. "He's exaggerating. It was just a small thing. The ambulance was blocking my driveway. I had every right to act." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Small thing?" I shot back. "She delayed a life-or-death emergency. That's not small." The officer took a long breath and glanced between us. "I'm going to have to take a report from both of you. This is serious." I stared at Karen. This wasn't just an HOA dispute anymore. Now it was a legal battle. I couldn't believe it had come to this, all because of one woman's need to control everything in her path. And worst of all, I had no idea how I was going to fix this. The courtroom was packed, more crowded than I expected for what I thought was going to be a simple, absurd HOA dispute. But as the doors closed behind me, I realized this was no longer about a tire or some trivial complaint about the neighborhood rules. It was about proving my wife's innocence and protecting our family from a woman who had no boundaries. And standing on the other side of the room, with a smug smile plastered across her face, was Karen. Her lawyer, a slick, middle-aged man with a too-shiny suit and an air of someone who thought they were smarter than everyone else, stood by her side, giving me a knowing look. He had that arrogant vibe, the kind that made you question if he truly believed the nonsense he was about to spew. This was the man who, for some inexplicable reason, was about to argue that I, the victim, was somehow in the wrong here. I took a seat, my heart hammering in my chest. I couldn't even look at my wife beside me. She was already going through enough. The stress of labor, the whole ambulance fiasco, and now this? The woman who had slashed our tire was standing in front of a judge with her hands on her hips like she owned the place. The judge, an older woman with glasses perched at the edge of her nose, glanced up at the room and sighed, clearly preparing herself for whatever ridiculousness was about to unfold. "Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, you're here today to discuss the complaint filed by your neighbor, Ms. Karen Thorne. Ms. Thorne, would you like to present your case first?" the judge asked, looking over the rim of her glasses at Karen. Karen stood up with dramatic flair, her lawyer nodding at her like he was proud of her theatrics. "Your Honor, I'm simply here to ensure the safety and integrity of our neighborhood. The ambulance was parked too close to my property, obstructing my driveway. I took it upon myself to make sure that this issue didn't become a bigger problem down the road. I am the one who keeps this neighborhood in check, and I've had enough of people ignoring the rules." The judge blinked slowly, clearly trying to process what Karen had just said. It didn't make sense. Everyone in the room knew it didn't make sense. But that didn't stop her from doubling down on her ridiculous claims. "You slashed the tire of their ambulance?" the judge asked, raising an eyebrow. "I did what was necessary," Karen replied with the calmness of someone who truly believed they were in the right. "The ambulance was in violation of HOA rules. And as a concerned neighbor, I thought it was my duty to take action. They were breaking the law, Your Honor. I couldn't help it. I shot up from my seat. Breaking the law? You slashed an emergency vehicle's tire, Karen. You delayed my wife from getting to the hospital during labor. Karen didn't flinch. Rules are rules, she said, as though she were delivering a life lesson to everyone in the room. The judge finally spoke up, her voice carrying authority. Mr. Hayes, please sit down. I reluctantly sat back down, trying not to explode in frustration. This was insane. How was this even happening? Karen's lawyer stood, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Your Honor, we have evidence that Mr. Hayes is the one who instigated this whole situation. He was the one yelling at Ms. Thorne when she was simply trying to enforce the HOA's regulations. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. The man was twisting the facts to make me the bad guy, while Karen, who had literally slashed a tire, was somehow being painted as the innocent bystander. The whole thing was so absurd it felt like we were all trapped in a bad comedy. I did not instigate anything, I shot back. I was trying to get my wife to the hospital, and Karen decided to interfere. She made a dangerous situation worse for no reason other than her obsession with controlling everyone around her. The judge nodded slowly, but her gaze stayed on Karen, who was now smirking. It was like she was enjoying every moment of this, like she was getting some sick satisfaction from watching me squirm. We've heard enough, Mr. Hayes, the judge said, her voice cool. Ms. Thorne, do you have anything else to add? Karen straightened her back. Yes, Your Honor. As I've stated, I was simply protecting the neighborhood from potential future violations. I'm sure Mr. Hayes can attest to the fact that there's been a history of similar issues around here. I've tried to get the HOA to step in before, but nothing ever gets done. I'm just trying to keep things in order. I felt my blood pressure rise again. Your Honor, she's lying. There's been no history of this. She's just obsessed with being the neighborhood enforcer. She doesn't even know how to take responsibility for what she's done. The judge tapped her gavel, cutting me off. Mr. Hayes, I understand your frustration, but we need to stick to the facts. I could see where this was going. Karen had crafted the perfect narrative, one where she was the hero, trying to save the neighborhood, and I was just some angry man trying to cover up the truth. Her lawyer was good, I had to admit that. But I wasn't going to let him get away with this. I wasn't going to let Karen walk away scot-free after everything she had put us through. I'm sorry, Your Honor, but there's something else I need to add, I said, standing again. I wasn't going to let this go. Not now, not after everything that had happened. I walked up to the judge, trying to keep my cool. Karen slashed the tire, yes. But there's more to it. This woman has been bullying everyone in the neighborhood, using the HOA rules as her weapon to control people's lives. We've all had enough of it. Karen shot me a venomous look, but I kept going. This isn't about a rule violation. It's about power. It's about her need to control everything and everyone. And it's time someone stopped her. I let the words hang in the air for a moment, hoping they'd sink in. The silence that followed was thick with tension. The judge sat back in her chair, eyes narrowing slightly. For the first time, Karen seemed less confident. Her smirk faltered. The judge turned her attention to Karen. Miss Thorne, you've made quite a bold claim here today. But we're dealing with the safety and well-being of a family, not neighborhood guidelines. Do you really think this was about enforcing the rules? Karen didn't answer immediately, and for a second, I thought she might actually back down. But then she straightened her back again, that smug look returning. Yes, Your Honor. I was doing what was necessary. I'm protecting the community from people who think they can just break the rules. The judge leaned forward, narrowing her eyes at Karen. Well, Ms. Thorne, I've heard enough. We'll adjourn and issue a ruling shortly. As I walked back to my seat, I couldn't help but feel a surge of hope. Maybe, just maybe, the tide was turning in our favor. The courtroom felt like it was holding its breath as the judge deliberated. Karen was sitting smugly across from me, her lawyer whispering into her ear, while I sat, hands clenched in my lap, waiting for the inevitable. It was hard to believe that something as simple as an ambulance tire slashing had escalated into a full-blown court case, but here we were. My wife, still recovering from the chaos, was home, waiting for an update. I could only imagine what she must be going through, feeling the weight of everything that had happened, the pain of labor, the stress of Karen's interference. Mr. Hayes, Ms. Thorne, I've reached a decision. The judge's voice cut through the tension like a knife. She was calm, her expression unreadable as she looked at both of us. I straightened in my seat, holding my breath. My mind raced through the events of the past few hours, Karen's sabotage, the legal nightmare, everything. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Ms. Thorne, the judge continued, your actions in this case were reckless and unwarranted. Slashing an emergency vehicle's tire, no matter the reason, is a serious offense. You interfered with an emergency situation, and that's something I cannot overlook. Karen's face paled for a split second before she regained her composure. Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably, but he didn't speak. It was clear the tide was turning. However, the judge said, I also acknowledge that this case has been clouded by emotions on both sides. Mr. Hayes, your reactions were understandable, given the circumstances, but I would advise caution in how you express yourself in future disputes. We can't let personal feelings get in the way of reasonable behavior. I didn't want to hear any more about what I could have done differently. This wasn't about me being emotional. It was about Karen causing unnecessary chaos and putting my wife at risk. Therefore, I am ruling in favor of Mr. Hayes and his wife, the judge announced, her gavel slamming down. The charges against Mr. Hayes are dismissed. As for you, Ms. Thorne, I'm issuing a fine for your actions, and you will also be required to attend community service in the form of a neighborhood watch position, where you will no longer be allowed to act outside the bounds of the law. Karen's face twisted in disbelief. She opened her mouth to protest, but the judge held up a hand, silencing her. Furthermore, the judge continued, I will be contacting the HOA to ensure that you no longer have any authority over the neighborhood's property enforcement. You've overstepped your bounds, and I'm putting an end to it. I felt a rush of relief wash over me. It wasn't just a legal victory, it was the satisfaction of knowing Karen's reign of terror was finally being shut down. I couldn't help but feel a small sense of victory. For once, she was getting exactly what she deserved. Karen stood up, her face flushed with rage, and stormed out of the courtroom without a word. Her lawyer followed her quickly, but not before shooting me a look of contempt. Good. Let them hate me. The important thing was that Karen's grip on the neighborhood was loosening. I stood up, too, making my way toward the exit with my head held high. The moment I stepped outside, I called my wife, the excitement in my voice impossible to contain. We won, I said, the words feeling almost surreal. It's over. Karen's getting a fine, community service, and the HOA's taking her authority away. She can't hurt anyone else anymore. I could hear the relief in my wife's voice on the other end. Oh my God, thank you. I was so worried. I know, I said. But it's over. We're done. You can rest now. For the first time in what felt like forever, I let out a deep breath. The past few hours had been a whirlwind, a chaotic series of events that threatened to derail the most important day of our lives. But in the end, justice had prevailed. Karen was going to have to face the consequences of her actions, and I wasn't going to let her or anyone else ever do something like that again. As I hung up the phone and walked to the car, the weight of the situation slowly started to lift. The neighborhood would never be the same after this. Karen's power had been dismantled, and people would start seeing her for what she really was, a bully who thought she could manipulate everyone around her. But the thing was, the neighborhood had finally woken up. It wasn't just about me winning a battle, it was about the entire community standing up against someone who thought they could control others through fear. I drove home, the air feeling lighter with every mile. I couldn't wait to get back, to hold my wife, to laugh about the absurdity of the entire situation. We had been through hell, but we made it out the other side, stronger and victorious. When I pulled into the driveway, my wife was waiting for me, a soft smile on her face as she opened the door. I rushed toward her, finally able to hold her in my arms again. For a moment, nothing else mattered, just the two of us, finally free from the chaos. And as I looked over at the empty spot where Karen's house stood, I couldn't help but think, this is just the beginning. The HOA had learned its lesson, and Karen had learned the hard way that you don't mess with a family who knows how to fight back.